On my dab rig. Get ready to smoke a toke, Eric, buddy. You're a legend, man. What are you saying? Eh? Ooh.
He admitted to the detectives that he went to Rural King and bought some black garbage bags that he used to wrap Miss Jeffrey's body in. He opened the door to that storage compartment and smelled something. He smelled an odor that is unmistakable, that he had smelled many times in his career. He smelled the unmistakable odor of death and decomposition.
In the fall of 2018, Lisa Jeffrey's family reported her missing when nobody saw or heard from her after her 48th birthday. Lisa's ex-husband, Beau Pete Jeffrey, told investigators that they still lived together, but he said he had no idea where she was or what had happened to her. Detectives from the sheriff's office in Marion County, Florida, eventually made a gruesome discovery in the trailer they had shared. And when they told Beau Jeffrey what they found, he did a 180 and told them an entirely different and altogether horrific story. Before we begin, we would like to express our deepest condolences to the O'Rourke family for their loss. Lisa Michelle O'Rourke was born in Tampa, Florida on November the 5th, 1970. We don't know much about her early years, but later in life she had 3 daughters and a son who meant the world to her. Lisa's children didn't always live with her, partly because she had developed a drug problem as a young woman. She battled addiction throughout her life, but her kids described her as a selfless and kind-hearted mother who always put their needs and well-being ahead of her own. Lisa had a number of relationships over the years, but she eventually married a convicted felon named Beau Pete Jeffrey in 2013.
Beau Pete Jangles.
They lived in a travel trailer located at the Holiday Travel Park RV Resort on West State Road 40 in Ocala, Florida. They had a few relatively happy years together, but between Lisa's drug use and Beau Jeffrey's drinking, things eventually took a turn for the worse. Lisa's daughter, Riley, lived with them for 5 or 6 years. When she was about 13, she witnessed a horrible fight between her mother and Beau, during which he put her in a chokehold and nearly strangled her. Riley eventually moved and started a family of her own in Iowa, but the domestic abuse got even worse after she left. On numerous occasions, Lisa's other children noticed
No zombies. I played zombies earlier, bro.
that they suspected were caused by Beau.
It's not really
Once,
feeling it recently, you know?
ring left a
Like Black
telltale
Ops 6.
on her arm.
It's good, but it's got like no replay value. You know what I mean? Like the only replay value in that game is to just camo grind. And camo grinding, let me tell you this, bro. Getting 2,000 headshots with every gun is tedious as fuck. You know what I mean? There's not even a lot of guns in the game, but it's tedious as hell.
Where he punched her. By the fall of 2018, their marriage was so abusive and unbearable that Lisa filed for divorce. But surprisingly, they continued living together afterwards out of convenience and financial necessity. Beau Jeffrey
shit.
found a new
I'd be down to do it, like...
Patience Helen Burton.
No, I'm not doing it
Patience
tonight,
was
bro. I'm
Beau
sorry.
Jeffrey's distant cousin. And she
I just really don't feel like playing zombies tonight, man. I apologize. I would definitely do it, like, genuinely any other day. I was just kind of out partying last night, so I'm fucking kind of just turned, you know? Kind of just fucked up from the night before.
Lupus and Crohn's disease. Sometimes her symptoms got so bad that she checked herself into hospitals without telling anyone. Even so, she always contacted her friends and family members to let them know where she was and that she was all right.
Did you just hear what this guy said? Yo, chat, listen to what this fucking guy says, okay? Listen to what this guy says in the video. You guys can hear this, right? Before the season starts? When does the season start, Ducky? Listen to what this guy says.
and tense, and Lisa often turned to drugs to deal with the stress and pressure. And to make matters
Listen to
worse,
this.
she was
Listen to this.
also dealing with a number of debilitating
Listen to this.
medical conditions like lupus and Crohn's disease. Sometimes her symptoms got so bad that she checked herself into hospitals without telling anyone. Even so,
she checked herself into hospitals without telling anyone.
She always contacted her friends and family members to let them know where she was. And
she always contacted family and friends to let them know where they were. The TikTok format streams always make me laugh.
She was all right. The sad truth,
bro, honestly,
that Lisa's life was on a downward trajectory, but she
streaming,
managed to maintain her relationships
like 2020 really blew streaming up in like a way that was unprecedented. But it's all just downhill from 2020 for streaming, I feel. You know what I mean? It was like, just because everyone's cooped up inside, nowhere to go and shit, COVID. Like, I don't know, streaming seems to be on the decline.
With her children, even though some of them lived out of state.
11 a.m. tomorrow? Well, fuck,
in
dude.
Oklahoma on Sunday, November 4th,
yeah.
2018. It was the day before Lisa's birthday.
I mean,
according to Jamie, she seemed perfectly fine.
Yeah,
Lisa
fuck, dude. You're gonna have to do that Easter egg on your own, man. I'm sorry. I just don't really feel like doing it tonight. I'm sorry. I apologize. You guys can do it, though. It's super fucking easy, bro. Like, I believe in you. You guys can do it. I've done it like 3 times already. Liberty Falls Easter egg's stupid, bro. Like, it's fucking pointless. Yo, Ducky, we'll play, like, dude, I gotta get a game in with, like, subscribers or something, so maybe this weekend I'll, like, set up some, subscriber games, and we'll just, like, try and get some fucking crazy shit done. Like, around 50 Easter eggs and stuff. You literally... Yeah, you literally just get... yeah. Yo, Fabosi, it's fucking stupid, bro. It's not even hard. Like, I feel as though that shit right there would be like a cool video would be to get to round 999 and then do that Easter egg, you know what I mean? That'd be super cool, I feel. But someone will do it eventually. Some fucking weirdo out there will do it. I'm not sinking 200 hours into fucking one round of zombies. That shit. That's what Insomnia Virus is doing right now. Oh, fair. There you go. Didn't have mics? Yeah, Liberty Falls is fucking ridiculous.
More excited about flying out to Oklahoma on November the 20th to visit Jamie and her family. This was a big deal for both of them because they hadn't seen one another in ages. Before hanging up, Jamie told her mother that she would call the following day to wish her.
Yeah, around 50, that's what I was saying. This weekend, I want to get some subscribers together and do that. That's literally what I just said, Fabosi. I want to, like, this weekend get, like, some people in there for that round 50, and we do the 4-player Easter egg. Like, round 50. I feel as though that shit would be fucking gas. I really feel as though that shit would be fucking just gas, bro. That'd be content, you know what I mean? Like, actual fun content, not this, like, sweaty, grindy horse shit. You've been a sub for, like, 2 years now? I know you have, bro. I know. Let's do it. Here. Ducky. You thought you needed a squad? Oh no, yeah, that one's super easy. Oh, tomorrow I'll be playing zombies, boys, for sure. You know what I've been wanting to do recently is do another 5 grind. Four Free Fire Legendary, 3 PAP Sigma RPGs with Idolize. Oh, Free Fire, yeah. The Pap Sig RPG, bro. That's just so good. Let's do it, boys. I'm actually serious. Like, let's plan. Let's plan for Saturday. Eh? I'm on your Discord. Oh, yeah, that. Thank you. Yeah, here. Let me do this. Oops. I gotta go grab a glass of water here soon, man. I'm fucking parched. You know what I find absolutely fucking hilarious? The fact that I have Frank Woods zombie. Fucking hilarious. There's my Liberty Falls and baby. Why is everyone level 1? Your guess is as good as mine, dude. Fucking shit game, that's why, buddy. Anyway, I gotta get off of that. I'm fucking... Just looking at that game right now hurts my brain. I'm gonna go grab a fat glass of water. I'll be right back, boys. Ooh, ooh. Shawnee Boy ripped a toke. Ordered a toke a little while ago. I never ripped. So. That's for you, Sean.
At that party, but Lisa and Bo Jeffrey ended up back at the travel trailer a few hours later.
It got me hot.
Jamie sent a text to her mom to wish her a happy birthday. But since Lisa didn't have her own phone, she sent the message to Bo's phone. Jamie and her sister Crystal both tried calling their mother throughout the day, but nobody ever picked up their calls. Jamie did get a text reply from Bo Jeffrey's phone later that afternoon. Also later that afternoon, she actually spoke to Bo, but he said that Lisa had taken money from his truck and some electronics from the home and had run off. Jamie didn't know if he was telling the truth or not, but she didn't think much of it because Lisa regularly disappeared for a day or two. As sad as it was to admit, she figured her mother was out using drugs. From past experience, she assumed that her mother would sooner or later call to let her know that she was okay, and that
Jackie, boy, gonna add you doing right now. All right, brother.
Money or a place to sleep.
Make sure I add you too.
But this time,
Subs,
Lisa never
Jayski
checked in with any of her children, friends, or family members for 2 weeks.
Jayski, this
She
weekend, you
never
want to
got
do
on the
round
flight to
50 Easter
Oklahoma
egg with me,
Crystal had
Fabozy,
booked
and
for her
Ducky?
on November the 20th either. This was alarming because she knew how much her mother was looking forward to seeing her. The situation got even more dire when no one had seen or heard from Lisa on Thanksgiving, and 3 days later she missed her daughter Crystal's birthday. By then, Crystal was so worried that she began calling local jails and hospitals to see if her mother had a medical issue.
All right, we got the
she had
4.
been picked up for drug possession.
There you go.
She also called her friends and family members in Florida, but no one had seen or heard from Lisa in weeks.
We have a lot of gums saved up. All we'll need is to use the Sigma, Idolize, and Free Fire.
In Maine. On Tuesday, November the 27th of 2018,
Saturday, yeah.
They decided it was time to call the Marion County Sheriff's Office and report her missing. Early in the investigation,
Oh, boys, I don't feel so good right now.
From the Marion County Sheriff's
He looks like
Office
Anthony Rizzo. He looks like Anthony Rizzo from the New York Yankees. Holy shit. That's crazy.
Bo Jeffrey to see if he had any idea where Lisa was. He told Deputy Batts that Lisa took some electronics from the travel trailer and $700 from his pickup truck and disappeared the morning after her birthday. After the conversation, Bo Jeffrey went to stay with a relative in Putnam County, Florida. On December the 2nd, Deputy Batts went to the Holiday Travel Park RV Resort to do a routine welfare check.
Red Aspect, how are you, dude?
Bo's 47-year-old girlfriend.
What's new with you, man? I hope you're doing well, buddy.
That she didn't know where Lisa was, but he got the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. At one point, he asked if he could come and look through her phone to see if there were any text messages from Bo about Lisa, but she claimed that she had lost it. But again, he didn't believe her, and she got defensive when he suggested that they look for her phone inside the trailer. Patience's behavior was suspicious to say the least, but at that point, nobody knew if a crime had been committed. As far as investigators and Lisa's family knew, she went off to use drugs as she had done numerous times before. Even so, nearly everyone
bro,
there was far more to the
I
story.
really just don't feel like playing. I was playing some zombies earlier, man, and it's just like,
December the
fuck,
2nd,
dude.
when investigators
I don't know, I'm a little burnt.
on that day.
I'm a little burnt
She
for
said
sure.
that she never lost her phone, but that Bo Jeffrey had it, and that she smelled an odd and offensive odor inside the trailer a few days after Lisa was reported missing. And even more shockingly,
The game
she
crashed
claimed
and
that
their save
Bo
disappeared.
told her that it was
You know what? I don't
Lisa's
even feel sorry for
decomposing
these
body.
people, bro,
Now,
because you
with
know
the
what?
apparent
They're
murder
just
on
doing
their
it to
hands,
themselves
officers
at the end of the
asked
day. They're just
patients
putting
for
themselves through
permission
this
to search
torture.
the trailer.
You know what I mean?
She
It's sad, yeah,
consented to
but
the
like,
search, but officers still
it's the way the fucking
arrested her
cookie
for
crumbles, bro.
giving false information. Patience was taken.
These
to
games
the
are
Marion County
unreliable as
Jail and
fuck.
held without bond.
I've been
At
there.
about 11:30 that morning, sheriff's deputies drove to the Holiday Travel Park RV Resort to search the trailer. They detected the telltale odor of decomposing flesh immediately upon entering, and moments later, they made an unthinkable discovery. Sadly, Lisa had been wrapped in black plastic trash bags and stuffed into a storage space beneath the bed in a spare bedroom. Later, crime scene technicians found a pair of bloody boxing gloves near her body and significant traces of blood spatter that someone had obviously tried to clean up. During the autopsy, the medical examiner found that Lisa had 4 deep lacerations and more than 24 significant bruises on her body. Shortly thereafter, investigators paid Bo Jeffrey a visit in Putnam County. He initially agreed to speak with them, but then got sick and began throwing up shortly after they arrived. His condition eventually got so bad that he had to be
Yeah, I was
taken
in
to a
there
hospital.
all
He was
night, bro.
released later that evening, and
I was in there
detectives
all
went
night.
to interview him
Yeah, I
again
was
the
just
following
rocking his
day.
shit. I was the
At
only
first,
motherfucker
Bo
talking
stuck
for
to
most
his
of it.
original story.
He is fuck.
But
I
he
had
quickly
him
changed
laughing
his
all
tune
night,
when they
bro.
told him
I
that
had that
they found
motherfucker
Lisa's
laughing all
body
night,
in
just saying
his
the
trailer.
wildest shit.
Bo Jeffrey
And
was
it's just
arrested
like, yo,
on
Vita
December
hit him with
6,
the 360
2018,
tap
and
straight
transported
cock
back
slap
to the
right to the
Marion
face,
County
bro.
Sheriff's Department
He
to
just
face
started
second-degree
laughing his
murder
fucking ass
charges
off.
in the death of his ex-wife, Lisa. Back at the station,
Yeah, what the fuck
investigators
did you
began
just say, my
interrogation
chat, bro?
by
What the
asking
fuck
Bo
does
a
that
number
even
of
mean? Hit him with the
questions
360
like
cock
where he
slap
was born and
tab
what he
stream.
did for a living.
So, let's talk a little bit about how long have you lived in Ocala off of 40?
I've been there about 8 months this time.
Okay.
Vita's fucking funny,
And
bro.
what do you
I love
do
how he
for-
just sits there and starts shit talking his teammates. He'll mute his mic and just shit talk his teammates. Be like, the fuck are these guys doing,
and
man?
is that work
None of them
for
are
you
paying
all,
attention.
or
This
is
is
that
fucking
just
horse
for-
shit.
Just down here.
What's that?
And then I'll just go back. Alright, guys, let's go.
Okay. And down here it's like what, Florida?
It's so
or-
funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
He just like avoids
And,
confrontation
do you
so
own your own
much.
business, or do you work for somebody else?
It's like the total opposite, man. I'd be calling motherfuckers up. But listen here, motherfucker. This is where you fucked up.
Me and my sons.
Okay. Do you have any employees under you, or is this just like a family thing?
No, I don't have no employees.
Okay. Do you go by Bo or do you go by Pete?
Pete.
Pete. Okay, Pete. So do you know why you're here?
No.
His teammates are
I'd
playing
like
the
to
game.
talk to you today and get to know you a little bit more. The circumstances are rather serious, so I want to make sure that we talk to you and we communicate clearly what we're here for and what the situation is that's going on. And as part of that, you came down here to the Putnam County Sheriff's Office today, right? Now, my understanding is you came down here voluntarily. Did you
No,
provide a
they
statement?
brought me.
Okay. Did you come here on your own free will, or did they bring you down here against your will?
They brought me.
Okay. Did when the deputy brought you down here, did you agree to come down here? Okay. So I want to let you know that I'm going to read you your rights, okay? Because I want to talk about some sensitive things with you. So I'm just going to read them off this card here, okay? You have the right to remain silent. Okay. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Okay.
Right.
You have the right to talk to a lawyer and have him present with you while you're being questioned.
Yes.
If you cannot afford to hire a lawyer, one will be appointed to represent you before any
We
question.
made Brian get
Okay.
BO6 and have him played
You
with
can
them?
decide
Yeah,
at
I
any
know.
time to execute these rights and not answer
I'll
any
play with
questions
the
or make
boy.
any statements. Okay. Do you understand each of these rights as I've explained them to you? Yeah. Oh, you're nodding your head. Yes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And having these rights in mind, do you wish to talk to us now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
From the very beginning, he was noticeably twitchy and fidgety, as if he was going through alcohol withdrawal. He even admitted to being an alcoholic, and a few minutes later threw up into a plastic trash can.
Let's talk about your. You gonna throw up?
Delicious.
Did you drink last night?
You want some napkins?
Let's give them something.
Later, when asked about Lisa, he described her as a sweetheart. He also said they had known each other their whole lives, but that she was addicted to crack cocaine and regularly smoked marijuana as well.
Oh no, not pot.
Tell me everything you can about her. Tell me if I pretend like I don't know anything about her. What kind of person is she?
She gets a little sweetheart, and she's sick with Crohn's disease, and we've just known each other all of our life.
Okay. Have you guys had problems with your marriage, or what's going on? Why did she leave?
Lisa? No, she always would just appear at night. I don't know where she went.
She would appear during the night? She would appear at night?
Disappear from my home.
Okay.
Well, I'd be asleep or something back down.
Okay. So what kind of things was she into? I mean, she's disappearing at night. What was she doing?
Crack.
Okay. Crack cocaine?
Yes, sir.
What kind of, aside from the crack cocaine, was there anything else that she was doing, that,
Smoking weed.
okay. And that you guys have had a lot of problems. Tell me about the history of your
Pops
marriage.
just like, I
What's
smoke
been
weed
going
too.
on?
Married.
Okay, that's what that okay meant.
I've been surviving, sir, but here in my chin, trying to get somewhere that they know me. Cause I know I'm gonna die today.
Okay. So when you guys got married, I mean, where did you guys get married at? Was this...
Okay, I'm gonna start.
Oh, okay. And correct me if I'm wrong. You don't have any kids with Lisa, right?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So you got married in 2012 in Stark, and tell me about the history of the relationship. Why did you guys get divorced?
She was bad on dope, and
Okay.
I wouldn't give her nothing no more. She would steal my money, and
Okay. Tell me more about that.
I just did it, and she would disappear or steal one of my trucks and rolled it around.
Okay. I had heard that she, or maybe you had told another law enforcement officer that she had taken some money out of your truck. Tell me about that.
I have 3 trucks, and I have little pouches underneath. I keep underneath the steering wheel.
Okay.
And for me to order to pay all my bills, I had to put a little money in this truck and a little money in that truck.
Okay.
And she would call her daughter called Paris and said, "What you doing, Mom?" And she said, "I'm cleaning out the truck." Then I woke up and the pouch was over there. She was gone.
How much money was it?
$700.
She took $700. Was that the night? That was the day. Did I understand you correctly? That was in November. I mean, the 5th. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
She was gone at that point. Okay.
So she took the pouch containing $700.
Bro, was this the only picture these two have? Holy shit.
November 5th. Okay. And has she been? If you haven't heard from her at all since then? Not by the phone or social media or anything?
So she would take no money and go down to the crack bottom until every penny was gone, and somebody would bring out there and kick her out my door again, and I'd get her back on. And as soon as she could move, she'd take whatever I had to go get the stuff.
Okay. So this is a routine thing for her to go take your money, routine and whatnot. And then, so you guys got divorced, is my understanding, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jeffrey eventually told investigators that he and Lisa had gotten into a violent fight on the night of her birthday because he didn't want her sitting on the couch naked. After arguing back and forth, he struck her multiple times, but he claimed that she was okay when he went to bed and that he found her dead in the bathroom the following morning. Then, he said he panicked, wrapped the body in the trash bags, and then hid it under the bed. According to the arrest affidavit, he even told investigators that he felt responsible for her death. Bo Jeffrey said that he hated Lisa so much that he wanted her to die of what he called natural causes, but he never admitted to killing her. Patience Burton eventually pleaded guilty to giving false information to law enforcement officers investigating a felony. Her sentence was deferred, but meanwhile, attorneys for the prosecution and the defense began preparing their case for the upcoming murder trial of Bo Pete Jeffrey. Before the defendant had his day in court, defense attorney Jason Wise filed a motion to exclude the items found in the travel trailer during the initial search. According to the attorney, the search was unlawful because officers got permission to enter the residence from Patience Burton. Since she was not the owner, the motion alleged that she did not have authority to allow anyone to enter the premises for any reason. The state argued that Patience kept personal items like shoes, clothing, and toiletries at the travel trailer, and that she had her own key. They argued that that made her a resident and that she had legal standing to approve the search. This was a pretty big deal. If Judge Stephen Rogers sided with the defense, he could exclude the evidence recovered from the trailer, and this could possibly include Lisa's body and the autopsy results.
Dude, that's
As
actually
such,
insane.
the tension in the courtroom was palpable for both sides as they did their best to sway Judge Rogers. After careful consideration, he ruled that the search was legal and the evidence was admissible. By the time the trial began on Tuesday, July
You'd be a fool
13th
not
of
to. I mean, it's a
2021,
fucking
Bo
clear
Pete
state
Jeffrey
case.
had been in custody in the Marion County Jail for 954 days.
Yeah.
During opening statements, prosecutors gave the judge, the jury of 9 men and 3 women, and Lisa's friends and loved ones a thorough overview of the events leading up to her tragic death.
I was actually waiting on Lisa to die in life of natural causes because in reality, I hated her that bad. That's what that man told the police about his ex-wife, Lisa Jeffrey, the woman he murdered, the woman he wrapped in garbage bags, and the woman he shoved in a storage compartment in his camper, in his trailer, in hopes that she would be forgotten. Ladies and gentlemen, she won't be forgotten. Lisa Jeffrey had some medical issues. She had Crohn's disease, she had lupus, and she needed some medications on a regular basis to handle those illnesses. You'll also hear that Lisa Jeffrey had some of her own demons involving some drug use throughout her life. It was not uncommon for Lisa Jeffrey not to maybe answer her phone or return a phone call for a day or two, but it was very uncommon for her family members not to have heard from her for weeks and weeks upon end. So with this information, Deputy Calvin Batts goes out to the Holiday Travel Park. He goes out to lot 808 where the defendant and Lisa Jeffrey shared that camper. Went on the property, knocked on the door of the camper, knocked on the windows, walked around the camper, walked around the lots, and hoped to find some information or some indication of where Lisa Jeffrey was. He found none. So he went back and he started to review the Marion County Sheriff's Office logs and learned that Jamie Curl, one of the victim's daughter, had called the Marion County Sheriff's Office several days earlier, also to report that she hadn't seen her mother in a while. Deputy Batts gave Jamie Curl a call, and Jamie Curl will tell you that she had not seen her mother or heard from her mother since around November 5th of 2018. And November 5th is an important date, and that was Lisa Jeffrey's birthday. On November 5th of 2018, Lisa Jeffrey turned 48 years old. And Jamie Curl had bought some plane tickets for her mother to come up to Oklahoma and visit her between November 20th and November 27th. Lisa Jeffrey never got on that plane and never came to visit her daughter. Jamie Curl actually called the defendant to inquire about her mother and where she was and whether she got the plane tickets that Jamie had mailed her. The defendant told Jamie, "I haven't seen your mother since November 6th, the day after her birthday." He told her he didn't know where she was, or what she was doing, or what happened to her. Patience Burton didn't give any information, any helpful information to find where Lisa Jeffrey was. The next day, on December 3rd of 2018, Detectives Pender and Detectives Levy from the Marion County Sheriff's Office again went to Patience Burton's mother's residence, which is located right down the street from where the Holiday Travel Park is. And they made contact with Patience Burton again, and they asked Miss Burton, knowing that she had been staying at that camper, if she would give permission for law enforcement to go inside that camper just to look for any information, any clues about Miss Jeffrey's whereabouts. Miss Burton agreed. They went over to the Holiday Travel Park, and Patience Burton, using her key, opened the door to the camper, and the detectives went in to look around. They looked around, they did a cursory look to try to find any information about where Miss Jeffrey was. And they went into the spare bedroom, which is located directly to the right when you walk in that camper, directly to the right. Detective Levy walked into that bedroom, noticed there was a mattress, noticed there was a storage compartment underneath that mattress. Detective Levy opened the door to that storage compartment, which is right down on the ground. The mattress sits on top of it. He opened the door to that storage compartment and smelled something. He smelled an odor that is unmistakable, that he had smelled many times in his career. He smelled the unmistakable odor of death and decomposition. There were a variety of other items shoved inside that storage compartment, and as Detective Levy began to remove each item one by one, a smell of decomposition and death grew stronger and stronger. Eventually, when those items were removed, he reached in and was able to see a black, heavy-duty truck-type tarp. And when he felt that truck-type tarp, he found a large object inside. That object, ladies and gentlemen, was Lisa Jeffrey's dead and decomposing body. He again indicated that they went to celebrate Lisa Jeffrey's birthday on November 5th, 2018. When they came back from celebrating her birthday, he and Lisa Jeffrey went into that camper, and when he was alone in there with Lisa Jeffrey, he admitted to striking Miss Jeffrey over and over and over again. He admitted to grabbing her by the hair and flinging her into the master bedroom closet. He told detectives, I put a wild...
Damn, I wish I could hear that.
He described seeing her face afterwards, and his words said she looked like a pumpkin. He admitted to the detectives that he went to Rural King and bought some black garbage bags that he used to wrap Miss Jeffrey's body in, along with the comforter. And he put her in that compartment underneath that mattress in the spare bedroom of the camper.
However, it was apparently so graphic and offensive that the audio had to be redacted from the courtroom footage. When it was the defense's turn to address the jury, attorney Jason Wise told them how intoxicated Bo Jeffrey was after Lisa's birthday party.
Ladies and gentlemen, what
The
happened?
thing is, it doesn't make you innocent if you're intoxicated. Terrible defense.
There's no question about it. You're going to see over these next few days that Miss Jeffrey's death was not the result of any intent on the part of Mr. Jeffrey to cause her death. And when you see the testimony from the medical examiner and potentially from another pathologist, you'll see that there's no evidence that Mr. Jeffrey caused Miss Jeffrey's death in any way. You're going to be instructed, I expect, at the end of the case that you can look for reasonable doubt in three potential areas.
No way.
Evidence, lack of evidence, and conflicts in the evidence. And I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, when you look at those three areas, you'll see that Mr. Jeffrey is not guilty of this charge.
No way.
I want to talk a little bit, to start with, about the evidence that I expect you'll hear, and Mr. Buxman just did a great job of detailing what he thinks the evidence will show, and I want to tell you what I think the evidence will show. Mr. and Mrs. Jeffrey had a good marriage for many years, but in the last couple of years, they developed a lot of trouble in their marriage. It became kind of a tragic story. Miss Jeffrey develops a drug problem, as you've heard about, and there'd be times when she would leave the house. They ran into problems. Mr. Jeffrey, I think you may hear some evidence, had a bit of a drinking problem himself, at least in the later years of their marriage. And we jump forward to the night of her birthday, Miss Jeffrey's birthday, and the birthday party that you just heard a little bit about. Mr. and Mrs. Jeffrey go out that night.
Oh my good golly gosh.
Friends and family. There's a lot of
We
drinking
did them all,
going on.
boys. Look at
The two of them go back to their trailer, and as you've heard, there's
that.
no
18,000 oak planks.
And I think you'll hear, if you hear Mr. Jeffrey's statements, I think you'll hear a lot more about what happened that night than just these couple of cherry-picked statements that came out. But in any event, when you hear Mr. Jeffrey talk about that, I think, ladies and gentlemen, when you pay close attention to that, you'll see Mr. Jeffrey doesn't really know what happened that night. You're going to hear the first statement, potentially, when he's talking to law enforcement at his aunt's house. He's throwing up. He's a complete mess.
And
Second
spend
statement, they
10
take him to the
mil.
hospital. Again, I would suggest he's a complete mess. When law enforcement goes back and talks to him again, he's still in the hospital.
10 mil on construction, only got 8 levels.
But that's when they discuss
That's
that.
crazy.
And that's when I think you will see, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Jeffrey doesn't know what happened. You'll see that he is very emotional. He cares about his wife. He was genuine in what he's saying. You'll see, as you've already heard, he panicked after that night. No question about it. You'll see reasons why, I expect. He doesn't really know what happened. His wife's dead. He's scared. He was there the night. He panics. When we talk about lack of evidence, and the lack of evidence that I think you'll see, you won't see any evidence that Mr. Jeffrey acted with any premeditated intent. It's not there. You're not going to see any evidence, I'd suggest, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jeffrey did anything that night out of ill will, hatred, spite, or evil intent.
You want to know how much faith that this lawyer has in the case? He can't even look straight up at the judge or anything. That's how much faith he has in his case. He just has to read notes.
He conceded that Mr. Jeffrey...
Compare those two, and the one's just like, you know, oh yeah, I got this, no problem. That's funny. I'm fucking tired. Ugh.
and Lisa got into a heated fight that was fueled by the copious amounts of alcohol they had imbibed that night. But he contended that Bo had no recollection of the fight, that it was a crime of passion, and that the evidence wouldn't be as clear-cut as the prosecution claimed it would be. As poignant as opening statements are, they paled in comparison to the testimony provided by Lisa's heartbroken children. Jamie said her mother seemed perfectly fine when they spoke the day before her birthday. She got emotional when she recalled phoning jails and hospitals around Ocala in the days after her disappearance.
Now, did your mom have a problem on and off with illegal drugs?
Yes, ma'am.
And had she gone missing before in the past?
Yes,
Hey, Yana, you gotta
For
go.
how long?
Yeah, I'm probably gonna go
Maybe
soon,
2
honestly.
days, but in that time frame, you'd hear from her.
So had she ever gone missing for weeks, like this time with no call?
No, ma'am.
Did you attempt to locate your mom yourself by making calls to different places?
Yes.
Okay, where did you call?
I called jails. I called hospitals, family members, and there's just
You couldn't find her?
couldn't find her.
Did you eventually call the Marion County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, ma'am.
And when did you do that?
I believe it was the 27th.
Of November?
Yes.
Okay, 2018? And why did you actually decide to call the Sheriff's Office?
I was worried.
Next, her 18-year-old daughter took the stand.
Now, when you first moved
That
in
chick
with her,
looks like
how was
she's
the
like
relationship
30.
between your mom and the
Holy
defendant,
shit.
Bo Pete Jeffrey?
It seemed like it was good. She was happy with them.
Okay. And then at some point, did that relationship change?
Yes.
Okay. How so?
After he started drinking,
All right. What happened after he started
Drinking?
he got more abusive to her.
Abusive?
Yes.
All right. So he wasn't drinking during the beginning of the relationship when you lived with them?
No.
All right. Did your mom have bruises sometimes after?
One more talk. Alright. Shit.
And did you say how often this physical abuse would happen?
Maybe like once every 2 weeks.
And what sort of things would cause the hitting, the physical abuse?
If something wasn't cleaned right or cooked right, stuff like that.
Something wasn't cooked right. Damn right, bitch.
Now, did
When I raise my hand, they're running in fear. Why is it always the Southerners, dude? Why is it always the Southerners, bro? I swear to God. Look at this. Look at this old man in the background. He's fucking balling right now. This old man in the background to the left is legitimately like torn apart. You can just see it, you know? He feels so bad.
The defendant wears some sort of jewelry on his hands.
Yes.
What was that?
He wore rings on all of his fingers.
Did you ever see any marks from any of those rings on your mom after he hit her?
Yeah.
Okay, can you describe what ring he had that you saw a mark on your mom?
It was a horseshoe ring,
Okay.
and it was onto her arm.
And did actually the mark a horseshoe ring mark?
Yeah, you could see it onto her.
Alright. And did he ever hit your mom, you talked about in the arms, in the face?
I've never seen her in the face.
Bro, this man's a straight alcoholic. He is fucking just shaking. Yeah, it's not because of nerves and shit.
Mainly the arms and her legs.
Alright. And
That
would this
man's
ever
an
happen,
alky.
when you guys were driving in the car?
Yes.
Alright. And what would happen in the car sometimes?
He would just reach over and just hit her.
Did your mom ever call the police?
No.
Did she ever leave him for a long period of time?
No.
Now, I want to ask you about a specific instance of violence that happened after a birthday party for the defendant's son when you all came back. Okay. Can you describe that incident for the jury?
We came back, and my mom was drinking from this birthday party, and he got mad because she was drinking, and they was arguing.
Drinking.
And he put her into a chokehold between his legs and had both of his arms around her neck.
So she was between his legs?
Yeah,
Can you
he
show
was
us?
sitting onto the couch, and my mom was on front of him onto the floor, and he was choking her.
Okay. With his hands?
One with like his arm and his hand like this,
Okay. And her head was...
in between like right here.
Bro, that sounds like
Did it come to the
this
point
chick's
where
house that I used to go to in high school.
Yeah, she was struggling trying to get his hands off her throat.
Okay. And how long did this incident last?
A
Her
couple
parents would be
minutes.
fighting and shit all the time.
Did your mom finally get able to get away?
Yeah.
And what happened after that?
They continued arguing, and my mom left.
About how old were you when that incident happened?
Probably like 13.
And now did your mom call the police after this incident where he choked her and she couldn't breathe?
No.
Did your mom have any family in Florida?
None of her own.
Did your mom work?
No.
Did she rely on the defendant for the necessities of life, basically?
Yes.
And how big was your mom?
She was fairly small. Maybe like 90, 100 pounds at the most.
And how was she health-wise? We talked a little bit about that.
She wasn't good health-wise.
Okay. Was there medications that she had to take regularly?
Yeah, she had to take shots weekly and medicine for it.
Did these shots make her weak?
Yes.
Did you ever see your mom hit the defendant back?
No.
Did you ever see your mom hit him first?
No.
Did you ever try to get your mom to leave the defendant?
Yes.
Testimony was especially gut-wrenching because she spent more than 3 minutes telling the jury about the fights she witnessed between her mother and Bo and the subsequent injuries. Additional family members took the stand and gave similar testimony. On more than one occasion, Mr. Jeffrey covered his face with his hands and shook his head while Lisa's loved ones took the stand. As its last witness, the state called the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Lisa's body. She said that Lisa's death had been caused by multiple blunt force injuries and that the wounds on the backs of her hands were defensive in nature. This is common during assaults when victims instinctively put their hands in front of their faces to protect themselves. Unsurprisingly, the defense called its own forensic pathologist to rebut the medical examiner's testimony. According to him, Lisa's blunt force traumas weren't necessarily caused by Mr. Jeffrey. In fact, the forensic pathologist claimed that they could just as easily have been caused by multiple falls due to acute intoxication. All told, the prosecution called more than a dozen witnesses over the 3-day trial. Even so, Bo Jeffrey never took the stand, partly because the judge informed him that the jury would learn about his previous felony convictions if he did.
If you choose to testify, one of the things in weighing the credibility of the witnesses, one of the instructions on that is that the jury can consider if a witness has ever been convicted of a felony. Right now, they don't know anything about your prior history. If you choose to testify, that state's going to elicit that information because they're entitled to do so, and they will learn that you have 4 prior felony convictions. If you choose not to testify, they won't know that information, but you won't get to tell your side of the story. But I would read the instruction advising them that you have a constitutional right not to testify. You don't have to prove or disprove anything, and they can't in any way hold that against you if you elect not to testify in this case. Mr. Wise indicates that you've had an opportunity to speak with him about this. Have you made a decision if you wish to testify or do not wish to testify?
I don't want to, sir.
All right, and you've had an opportunity to speak with your attorney about that, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, and you're making that decision of your own free will?
Yes, sir.
All right, good enough. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
She also pointed out that Lisa weighed less than 100 pounds, 45 kilograms, and that Bo Jeffrey violently beat her to death simply because he didn't want her sitting on the sofa while she was unclothed. According to the state, he became so enraged that he grabbed her by the hair, dragged her into the bedroom, and beat her so violently that she vomited and lost consciousness. And more shockingly, he returned to beat her multiple times over the next few hours. Assistant Prosecutor Berndt described the attack as sick and said the defendant clearly hated his wife. And to hammer the point home, she showed the jury crime scene photographs of Lisa's body wrapped in trash bags. Afterwards, defense attorney Wise attempted to paint an entirely different picture of the night in question. He admitted that Bo Jeffrey and Lisa had a troubled relationship and that his client was no angel. But he claimed that Lisa was not severely beaten and that her ex-husband didn't intend to kill her, and that there wasn't enough blood found at the scene to substantiate the prosecution's version of events. In summary, he claimed that the crime was committed in the heat of passion, that Bo Jeffrey was too intoxicated to remember what happened, and without intent, the jury could not convict him of premeditated murder. Nobody could predict how long it would take the jury to reach a verdict when they were excused to deliberate. But since the trial only lasted 3 days, everyone assumed they would reach their decision in a matter of hours or a few days at most. Early on, the foreman sent the judge a note asking if the jury could review the court transcripts. After consulting attorneys from both sides, Judge Rogers denied the request on grounds that the transcripts were not technically evidence. Nonetheless, the jury had alerted the bailiff that a verdict had been reached just before 3 p.m. that afternoon. They re-entered the courtroom shortly thereafter, and a few minutes later, the clerk stood and read the verdict as Lisa's emotional friends and family members and the defendant, Bo Pete Jeffrey, looked on in anticipation.
Okay. All right, we're a jury of your peers having found you guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree. The court also finds you guilty. I am adjudicating you guilty. I am ordering that you serve a sentence of life imprisonment with the Department of Corrections. I am going to order payment of a $10,000 fine plus court cost, $100 cost of prosecution, $100 for the services of your attorney as well.
They found Bo Jeffrey guilty of first-degree murder, and when the jurors were polled individually, they all confirmed that the verdict had been reached unanimously. Bo Jeffrey decided to make a statement before the sentencing portion of the trial got underway. That afternoon, Bo Jeffrey's girlfriend, Patience, nodded at him solemnly as he was led out of the courtroom, but one of Lisa's relatives yelled something to him before he went through the door. Defense attorney Wise expressed disappointment after the trial, but he also said that he had a number of promising avenues for an appeal. During post-trial interviews outside the courtroom, Lisa's daughters told a reporter what they really thought of Bo Jeffrey.
I thought he would show some kind of remorse, but when you do something to that extent, he has no soul. He's the absolute devil. There's nothing to him.
What do you think was the worst part of this for you?
All of it.
You had to testify, right? You had to tell them what the relationship was like?
Yes.
So, thinking about your mother, how do you want her to be remembered?
That she had a good soul. She'd do anything for anybody. No matter what it was, she would give you the shirt off her back.
And are you...
Bro, why they gotta do her like this? She shouldn't even be answering any of these questions. The fuck?
She was 97
Media's
pounds,
so
and,
fucking...
you know,
They're
the
vultures,
defense attorney
man.
said that she was quite the feisty little woman. Do you think that she was as aggressive as he made her out to be? That somehow they got into
She
it?
was hard-headed, but nothing like he made her out to be. She was not the person that they described her in court.
In the middle of the trial, he looks back over at us, starts mouthing words. I don't know what he mouthed. He stuck his hand to the side, just like
He did
this.
it twice. He
and
went
was
like
flipping
this,
us off
and then went like this.
throughout the whole trial. Why? He's evil.
Then, shortly after the interview, Patience Burton was escorted out of the courtroom just a few feet away. She didn't say a word as she walked past Lisa's emotional family members, but somebody in the group had a few choice words for her. They were understandably angry that she stood by Jeffrey throughout the trial and that she wasn't prosecuted for giving detectives false information when they questioned her on December 2nd of 2018.
The police ain't where you live, honey. Don't do this.
They can arrest me for it. She's not my mother.
It is. She's crying over a man that killed an innocent woman, and he gets to walk through it. She gets to walk away. My mother's never gonna speak to her again because he wanted an old war. Because she wanted her care.
Bo Jeffrey was eventually transferred from the Marion County Jail to the state penitentiary, where he will serve his term for the rest of his natural life.
How can you be the head of one of the biggest drug trafficking networks in history, run away with the equivalent of over $100 million in today's money, and disappear without a trace? I think only Frank Matthews holds that secret. Ranked by the DEA as one of the top 10 drug traffickers in U.S. history, Frank Matthews has had an incredible story, yet few people talk about it. Based in Brooklyn in the 60s and 70s, this young African-American gangster, in his 20s at the time, was indeed at the head of one of the greatest criminal empires this world has ever known. His fortune was estimated at $300 million, the equivalent of $2 billion today. A colossal fortune acquired through the sale of heroin and cocaine throughout the eastern United States, a network that was totally independent of mafia control, which was extremely rare for an African-American gangster, and I'd like to say for an American gangster at all. By freeing himself from the mafia, Frank Matthews had done better than his predecessor, Bumpy Johnson, but also better in terms of fortune than Frank Lucas, the heroin dealer popularized by the film American Gangster. But then again, few people seem to know about this. No doubt Hollywood didn't want to popularize a criminal who had managed to beat the system. Because can you imagine a gangster movie with the thug running off with the money at the end? Because that's exactly what Frank Matthews did, even though he was supposed to appear in court. Disappearing from the face of the earth just like that, with his girlfriend and over $100 million in his pocket. A completely surreal and enigmatic end to a criminal career. In short, a mysterious gangster who certainly deserves to have his story told. So, get ready to dive into the most intriguing unsolved case of recent decades.
And he had been identified as one of the largest, if not the largest, heroin trafficker in the United States.
He was in a league of his own, and he was a top, not only an organizer, but a businessman. There's been a lot of recent movies on Lucas being the king of drugs. That's not true. And Matthews was the #1 heroin pioneer.
I'd say he was definitely smarter than Frank, okay? Frank Lucas, yeah.
Where he is today, God only knows.
I think he's alive. And I say this unequivocally because he's a smart person.
All of the agents who work on the case to this day believe he's still alive.
The life of Frank Matthews is, how can I put this, one hell of a mystery. But what's even more of a mystery is his youth, about which we really know very little. The reason? The many conflicting accounts from people who supposedly knew him. Ricky Johnson, a native of Durham, the North Carolina town from which Frank Matthews came, tells us,
"You hear so many stories about Frank Matthews. It's hard to distinguish what's what. They all have a different version of growing up with him. You realize a lot of what you hear is really just rumor."
Another Durham resident agrees.
"A lot of people like to make up stories so they can be in the limelight. They say they remember Frank sold drugs for him, but then you realize they are younger than Matthews and not from the same generation. They just want to be a part of the legend."
As for those who really knew him, well, they generally avoid talking about it. As this Durham native, who claims to have known Frank, puts it,
"You ain't gonna get people from here to open up about Frank. They're either thinking you with the law, or they fear they may say something that can come back and bite them. People here are cautious. Many think Frank Matthews is still alive. You never know who's listening, or what may get back to him."
So, it's not easy to get a clear picture of Frank's youth. But there are a few things we can learn about his early years. Frank Larry Matthews hails from Durham, North Carolina. He was born there on February 13, 1944, into a family he hardly knew. We know nothing about his father. As for his mother, she died when he was barely 4 years old. From then on, young Matthews was raised by his aunt, who took him in and raised him as her own son. He lived in the poorest district of Durham, a city renowned at the time for being home to one of the most prosperous black communities in the country, despite the segregation in force. A Durham native and friend of Matthews recalls,
"The Rand and segregation days had everything a black person could want. We had a lot of black wealth, per capita. We had more black millionaires than any city in North Carolina. The atmosphere of this period gave young blacks the incentive to try to achieve more."
Which I'm sure Frank was, inspired without a doubt by all the successful black entrepreneurs in Durham. Al Bradley, an author who has written extensively on Frank's life, will say,
"Matthews must have seen lots of black-owned businesses and successful black men when he was growing up. That later gave him the chutzpah to circumvent the Italian mafia in the drug business. That was unheard of at the time. Something in Matthews growing up gave him the confidence to stride fearlessly into a world that didn't respect him."
Frank made his mark from an early age, especially with his classmates and the boys in his neighborhood. He seems to be a born leader, whom children of his age want to follow. People who knew him as a child used the same two words to describe him: strong and charismatic. Qualities that would later enable Frank to compete with New York's most ruthless gangsters. At school, however, the picture is not the same. Frank lacks seriousness and seems disinterested in his schooling. What he prefers is to be on the streets, an environment in which he's like a fish in water. No wonder he dropped out of school at an early age. All he wanted to do was make money, as one of his childhood friends recalls.
Even in those days, he was all about money. Frank was a hustler.
Frank Matthews could also be generous to his loved ones. On the other hand, you didn't want to mess with him because he could also turn violent, as another of his comrades points out.
Frank was a natural who would fight anybody over anything.
He could, however, be aloof and reserved, as this other friend reveals.
People bragged that they knew Frank, but they didn't really know him. You could never really get close to Frank.
As a teenager, he became the leader of a gang in which he was involved in several petty crimes, including the theft of chickens from a local farm, which led to his arrest at the age of 14. He later joined a hairdressing school, but only stayed there a few months. According to a Durham native, this was because Frank had been caught stealing barber's equipment. But the latter also adds,
"Not too long after that, I saw Matthews on Fayetteville Street. He said he was going to New York to make money."
Frank left his hometown of Durham in the early 60s to seek his fortune. Still in his teens, he set off to pursue his dreams of fortune by heading northeast, initially for Philadelphia. He stayed there for about a year. During this time, he worked as a barber and number collector for a numbers game racket. Through this illegal activity, which was widespread at the time, Frank met other ambitious young people who, like him, were looking to make money. But, as mentioned, Frank didn't stay long in Philadelphia, and in 1963, or perhaps 1964, he left for New York. A logical choice for Roger Garay, a police detective who had investigated him.
New York is a city of opportunity for an ambitious gangster, as well as for those who want to make an honest living.
Frank moved to Brooklyn and continued to do what he had been doing in Philadelphia, working as a hairdresser while organizing illegal gambling. He continued this activity for some time before tiring of the numbers game racket and turning to a more profitable business: drug dealing. Frank was quick to see that the black drug dealers in his neighborhood were lining their pockets, so it didn't take long for him to decide to follow, as Inspector Roger Garay points out.
I think Frank woke up one morning and decided to hang up the barber's white jacket. Frank said to himself, "I'm going to be the dude who wears the $300 silk suits and drives the Lincoln."
In the 60s and 70s, an illicit substance spread massively in New York: heroin. At the time, the drug was creating a veritable epidemic, fueling violence and disorder in the black community, a chaos that one of the city's former police officers remembers.
The year after King's assassination, we had more than 2,000 homicides in New York. The majority of them were in Harlem, and I'd say about 85% of them were drug-related. It got so bad that if a cop working in Harlem gave someone a summons for double parking, it could easily have led to a small-scale riot. That's how close to the edge Harlem was in the late 1960s. Drug dealers like Frank Matthews and Nicky Barnes became heroes because people looked upon them as defying a system that didn't work.
Frank took advantage of the situation, and in order to get involved in the flourishing drug trade, he had no choice but to make contact with a criminal organization that controlled the supply and distribution of heroin throughout New York, the Great Cosa Nostra. In the 1960s, the drug trade on the U.S. East Coast, and particularly in black communities, was controlled by New York's 5 major mafia families: the Gambinos, the Lucchese's, the Bonanos, the Genoveses, formerly Luciano, and the Colombos, formerly Profaci. For a time, the trade was dominated by Jewish gangsters, notably Arnold Rothstein, an organized crime figure who, as early as the 1920s, had grasped the lucrative potential of this illegal trade, helping to organize and expand it in Uncle Sam's country. Then, in the 1930s, the Italian mafia, seeking to diversify after Prohibition, joined the Jewish underworld in drug trafficking before monopolizing the market in the following decade. After the Second World War, heroin, which the mafia trafficked, was imported from Italian refineries. These refineries closed after the Italian government decided to ban heroin manufacture in the early 50s. Left with no choice, the mafia looked for other sources of supply. And it was here that the French Connection was born, with the establishment of an even more sophisticated smuggling network in which opium was cultivated in Turkey, then sent to France for processing in clandestine laboratories, and finally distributed throughout the United States. This network, which thrived in the 50s and 60s, enabled the American mafia to continue trafficking drugs in the United States and New York. To penetrate this market and start selling his first kilos of heroin, Frank Matthews had to go through the Cosa Nostra. He did this by trying to form a partnership with the Gambino and Bonanno families, but for one reason or another, they turned him down. Many would have been discouraged by this refusal, but not Frank. He was young, ambitious, and determined to make his mark in the dope business. So he persevered until he found another opportunity. An opportunity that came from Spanish Raymond Marquez, an acquaintance of Frank's known at the time as the king of the underground lottery in Harlem. He had connections, which he passed on to Frank, putting him in touch with a Cuban gangster by the name of Rolando Gonzalez Nunez, a major cocaine supplier who, in the 1960s, was one of the biggest coke dealers in New York, before fleeing to Venezuela because of legal problems. Frank gets in touch with Rolando and the deal is sealed. He buys his first kilo of cocaine for $20,000. The relationship quickly developed into a drug trafficking network. The Cuban drug trafficker regularly sent him large shipments of cocaine and heroin from South America, and Frank expanded his business by reselling the product in New York. And it didn't take him long to make his mark, becoming one of the city's biggest drug dealers in just 1 year. At the time, Venezuela was one of the Latin American countries where the Cosa Nostra was established. For drug traffickers, it was a strategic location, particularly thanks to its geographical proximity to the United States. An ideal base, which the French Connection used to transport its heroin to Latin America and distribute it to Miami, one of the main points of entry to the United States for drug trafficking. The Corsicans, with their ability to infiltrate and corrupt governments, were responsible for transporting the drugs to Venezuela. Then the Cubans would send the heroin to the United States before it was distributed throughout the country, including New York, where Frank, thanks to his collaboration with the French Connection and the Cubans, had become one of the city's biggest dealers. His network with the French Connection and the Cubans was paying off handsomely, although Frank knew he had to diversify. To do this, he set out to find new sources of supply and was prepared to do business with anyone as long as the product was pure enough.
Matthews was always willing to pay premium prices for multi-kilo shipments of pure heroin, if that was the best he could find.
In the end, Frank was just the opposite of La Cosa Nostra, who sold its drugs at exorbitant prices with no regard for the quality of the product. And so, it wasn't long before his network expanded even further, supplying drugs to nearly 21 different states, particularly on the East Coast of the United States. It never reached California, but in time, it certainly could have taken over the whole country, as U.S. Federal Prosecutor William Callahan reports.
If Matthews' wings hadn't been clipped as they were in 1972, he would have eventually dominated the national scene, and then he would have become a truly international kingpin. I think Matthews was so ambitious that could have been his ultimate goals.
Frank Matthews' profits from heroin and cocaine trafficking were staggering. It is said that he made up to $600,000 a day, and that his fortune was close to $300 million, the equivalent of $2 billion today, a fortune he amassed in the space of just 4 years. According to Liddy Jones, a former associate of Frank's, no gangster in New York at the time earned more money than him.
The Italian mafia made a lot of money, but they couldn't touch Frank. He had more money than the mob.
Liddy Jones then recounts this anecdote from the early 70s.
I had a good friend who said she knew somebody in Brooklyn who could give me all the smack I needed. My friend was tight with an associate of Frank. I asked for 5 keys and got it for $22,000 a key. I began making real good money from my connection to Frank Matthews. I learned I wasn't anything special. All the top drug dealers along the East Coast were getting their dope from Frank. It was amazing to make a deal with him. He never really counted the money. You could have shorted him thousands of dollars, and Frank wouldn't have known.
Oh, he would know, bro. Trust me, motherfucker. He would have known. You would have known too. Guarantee that.
5 years after his arrival in New York, Frank Matthews had become the biggest drug baron in the city, even though he was barely in his 20s. He had created his own drug trafficking network, completely independent of the mafia, which was quite a feat for an African-American gangster. At the start of his criminal career, Frank Matthews was rather reserved in his lifestyle. He lived in a modest flat and didn't seem to do anything crazy, as Rick Talley, a former New York drug dealer who knew Frank in the late 60s, recalls.
In those days, Matthews did not really stick out in the crowd. In the way he was dressed, the way he talked, Frank looked and moved more like a country kid from North Carolina than a polished gangster.
However, as his drug empire grew, Frank began to take on a completely different role. He would dress in expensive clothes, cigar in mouth, and drive around in luxurious cars, showing off with beautiful women. He also traded in his modest flat for a mansion in the wealthy Toad Hill district of New York, a neighborhood that at the time was known for housing some of the city's most notorious mobsters, including Big Paul Castellano, the future godfather of the Gambino family, who had his home directly opposite Frank's mansion. There were also some members of the Lucchese family, and Frank was the only black man living there.
No black people lived there, and some of the most powerful mobsters were just a stone's throw away from Matthews' house. In the Matthews era, the only blacks you could see in Todd Hill were the hired help. Even today, blacks comprise just the 1% of Todd Hill's population.
Otherwise, Frank was a heavy cocaine user, if not a drug addict. Donald Goddard, an author who took an interest in his life, recounts,
By the autumn of 1972, Matthews showed the classic symptoms of chronic cocaine abuse, shuffling between extremes of euphoria and irritability. This helps explain Matthews' frequent irrational behavior in the way he handled drug deals.
William Callahan, the federal prosecutor who investigated the Matthew case, adds,
During the course of our investigation, we learned that he had a rapid, irregular heartbeat, so by abusing cocaine, Matthews was risking his health.
An addiction that didn't stop him from continuing to expand his empire and amass even more money.
It's amazing to see what he did as a self-made man and how he built a criminal empire on his own. I think the only people in organized crime history comparable to Matthews are Lucky Luciano and Pablo Escobar.
Frank can indeed be compared to Luciano and Escobar, in the sense that, like them, he was the organizer and master of ceremonies of summits between kingpins. One in Atlanta in October 1971, during which he invited the country's biggest African-American and Hispanic drug traffickers with the aim of improving the distribution of heroin and cocaine. And the other in Las Vegas the following year, during the fight between Muhammad Ali and Jared Quarry, a meeting where similar topics were discussed, such as the need to establish stronger independent relations with the Corsican and Cuban mafia in order to free themselves from the control of the Italian-American mafia. An American anti-drug agent recounts,
When we began checking out the license plates and the intelligence on who was in attendance, we could see it was a meeting of the who's who of black organized crime. Matthews was the reason they came. At the time, he really was the country's biggest black kingpin.
It was then that the authorities began to take a closer interest in him.
Already subscribed, Life of a Gangster.
Las Vegas was a place where Frank Matthews often went. Like many drug dealers, he loved a city that had legalized gambling. Frank went there to gamble, to have a good time, but also to launder his money, as prosecutor William Callahan points out.
We heard Frank would take duffel bags full of cash to a casino and give them to a cashier. The casino would take 15 to 18% for laundering his money.
The strange thing was that the authorities didn't even have him on their radar. Frank Matthews had illegally made his fortune and risen to the top of the underworld, and no one in the police force seemed to know about it.
In 1970, Matthews' name did not appear on any of the major criminal violators lists kept by the authorities. He was a non-entity.
In fact, it wasn't until shortly after the Las Vegas summit in 1972 that the police finally started tapping his phone. It was the investigative group known as Group 12 that took a serious look at his case. Its aim? To find a way to indict drug baron Frank Matthews. The investigators included William Callahan, whose role was to coordinate the investigation, and Gerard Miller, a DEA agent with 20 years' experience in organized crime. Group 12 had to gather all the evidence they could to prove that Matthews was involved in drug trafficking. Not an easy task, given that Frank's only criminal record was for stealing chickens. Besides, Gerard Miller couldn't understand how such an influential drug trafficker had managed to escape the vigilance of the police so far. And how could an African American in his 20s be involved in drug trafficking in almost 21 states of the country? It was a perplexing observation for the agents, including Miller, who said,
I hate to say it, but Frank was ahead of us from the beginning.
The investigation was therefore not easy to carry out, especially as Group 12 was under a great deal of pressure from its hierarchy to obtain results. And a lack of resources made available to carry out the investigation didn't help matters. The agents only had 3 months to produce something significant, which was very little, especially to nail a gangster of Matthews' caliber. In reality, it would have taken several years of investigation to achieve a convincing result. But Gerard Miller and his colleagues did their best with the resources at their disposal. It was thanks to them that Frank Matthews' telephone calls began to be tapped in 1972. The U.S. anti-drugs authorities then lent their support to the case, followed by Interpol and the U.S. Tax Service, with whom Group 12 was working closely to pursue the drug baron. Together, they succeeded in locating and seizing assets belonging to Frank, including several real estate properties. The investigators then tried to tail his car whenever they could, but Frank was faster than them and always escaped, breaking every possible rule of the road. Frank was probably under the influence of cocaine during these chases. Or did he know in advance that he was being watched? Corruption was widespread in the NYPD at the time. Either way, it wasn't worth continuing for Gerard Miller.
At the time, it still is, bro. Don't trip.
It didn't really matter. We knew it was futile to follow him. He didn't seem to fear anything.
He once opened the boot of his car in broad daylight, took out kilos of drugs, and gave them to an individual in full view of everyone. As if Frank Matthews didn't give a damn about law enforcement surveillance. But it was only a matter of time before things turned in the investigators' favor.
I mean, selling drugs out in the open, definitely a
70s,
changer.
Frank Matthews' network continued to supply the United States with illegal
Man started off with humble
and generate
means and just
millions
became
of
so
dollars in
cocky.
revenue. Group
Was
12's
he in his psyche
investigation
alive?
progressed to the point where it caused the first damage to the drug baron's empire. It began with the arrest of several of his associates. The arrests followed one another over time, with tongues occasionally being loosened, giving Group 12 more and more evidence to flesh out their case. After a year's investigation, the authorities finally had solid evidence to bring down Frank Matthews. All that remained was to arrest him. The arrest took place at 11 a.m. on January 5, 1973. Frank was at Las Vegas International Airport with his girlfriend, flying to Los Angeles, when the authorities stopped him to handcuff him. Sometime later, they had obtained an arrest warrant for tax fraud and conspiracy to traffic drugs. Matthews had attempted, between April and September 72, to sell 18 kilograms of cocaine in Miami, with an estimated value of between $1 and $4.5 million. So, drug baron Frank Matthews was finally arrested. All that remained was to await his trial, scheduled for 7 months later. At the bail hearing, which took place the day after his arrest, Frank showed a certain arrogance towards William Callahan.
We were literally face to face. He told us that we had nothing on him and that he would be out in no time.
He seemed confident, but was soon disillusioned when he heard the amount of bail set by the magistrate. $5 million, the highest bail in the history of the United States at the time. This amount had been set because of Frank Matthews' high risk of absconding and his large fortune. Bail was subsequently reduced to $2.5 million, Frank having agreed not to oppose his extradition to New York. Then it was reduced again to $325,000, a ridiculous sum for a drug lord of Matthews' stature, who, unsurprisingly, jumped at the chance to regain his freedom. Yes, Frank Matthews was now free before the judgment, a mistake that the American justice system would come to bitterly regret, since the young gangster was not going to wait long to make his move.
Well, neither would I, dude. $20,000 reward. Good luck. My man
Frank had regained
my man
his
Frank would pay me
and was
like
once
triple
again at the
that.
head of his criminal organization. For the investigators, this made it difficult to keep an eye on him before the trial. Police Inspector Roger Garay testifies.
We couldn't keep tabs on Matthews. We were stretched thin and simply didn't have the manpower to watch him 24/7. All we could do was hope and pray he would keep showing up in court.
Hope was all that police had, because in the end, there was nothing to stop Frank Matthews from taking his belongings and disappearing with all his fortune. It has to be said that he was facing a life sentence, and that in any case, the heroin market was increasingly unstable because of the gradual dismantling of the French Connection. So, based on this observation, there was nothing to stop him taking off. And that's precisely what happened on July 2nd, 1973. When the accused Frank Larry Matthews never showed up for the trial that was to send him to prison. The drug baron had disappeared, declared fugitive the day after his trial. So, what had happened? Well, some sources claim that Frank bid farewell to friends and gave away part of his fortune before disappearing for good.
We heard Frank left New York with 55-gallon drums filled with money.
Reggie Collins, a drug dealer at the time, says he was one of the last friends Frank saw before he disappeared.
It was 4 a.m. and we were at Flaps on 119th Street. Frank said he was heading out of town and not coming back. I watched him drive off in a 1972 Ford Thunderbird, black body, white top. Never saw him again.
Frank Matthews is said to have fled, but not alone, it seems, as his mistress, Cheryl Denise Brown, is also nowhere to be found. She had disappeared at the same time as Matthews, which suggests that the two ran away together. The authorities also claim that Frank Matthews laundered up to $20 million to prepare his escape, most likely leaving the country. $20 million at the time is equivalent to more than $100 million today, so that's quite a lot of money. The DEA offered a $20,000 reward to anyone who could help capture him. This was the highest reward since the one offered for John Dillinger in 1931. The authorities put out thousands of wanted posters across the country, receiving numerous calls from people claiming to have seen the fugitive. Unfortunately, these leads went nowhere. But the hunt for Frank Matthews intensified, and the DEA searched the world for him, having no doubt that they would capture him one day. Glenn Chisholm, one of the investigators involved in the search, recounts,
It was the biggest manhunt in DEA history, so I was excited to be a part of the team. But it was frustrating as well. It looked as if we had mountains of evidence, but as we moved forward, the leads seemed to vanish into thin air.
However, we have learned that thanks to Interpol, which is collaborating with the U.S. authorities on the case, Frank Matthews has been seen in Rome, Amsterdam, and other European cities. Perhaps Frank Matthews was in Europe? If the reports on him are to be believed, it's entirely possible, but it was also likely that he was in Africa, Bermuda, the Bahamas, Venezuela, Philadelphia, Chicago, rural North Carolina, or maybe even Hong Kong.
Chicago?
Yeah, that's a lot of places. The problem is that there's hardly any useful information in the files or any real leads to locate him. There are, however, some locations that are more plausible than others, like the Bahamas, a place where the fugitive owned property. Paraguay, known at the time to be home to the largest number of fugitive criminals. Or Algeria, the ideal country for a fugitive in the 1970s, given that relations between Algeria and the United States were not very good at the time, and there was no extradition treaty between the two nations. The investigators therefore hoped that he was not there, because it would have been, shall we say, virtually impossible to capture him. The investigation group in charge of finding Matthews received hundreds of leads from all over the world. It was as if Matthews could be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Getting information out of interviewees was also very difficult, as Glenn Chisholm reports.
During the entire time I was involved with the investigation, I never interviewed anybody who actually knew anything about Frank's whereabouts. They would say invariably that if they knew where Frank was, they would not tell us because Frank was generous with his money.
Strangely, no one seemed willing to give any information about Frank Matthews. The investigators therefore interviewed other people, such as Barbara Hinton, Matthews' former wife, with whom he had 3 children.
We interviewed Barbara at her liquor store. The store was sparsely stocked, and it didn't look to be a moneymaker. Barbara struck me as being bitter. I don't know if she was that way personally, or if she was upset that Frank had left her. In any case, we believe she didn't do anything.
Al Parrish, Glenn Chisholm's colleague on the Frank Matthews case, also gives us his impressions of the interview with Barbara Hinton.
It did not seem that Hinton had any recent contact with Matthews. What kind of man leaves his kids and doesn't show up again? Surely, if he was alive, he'd have stayed in contact with Barbara for the sake of the kids. I just didn't get it.
The Frank Matthews lead became weaker as time went on. Investigators Glenn Chisholm and Al Parrish, who were working on the case, were quite critical of Gerard Miller, the man that had led the Group 12 that had charged Matthews. Because according to them, Miller had done a poor job of thinking he knew everything.
That man's probably deader than fuck, dude.
There was very little to go on.
And they probably took him out to the fucking Colombia somewhere and just fucking shot him, bro. Sitting there, I guarantee you, bro. Wherever he was getting his connect.
Examining the files,
wherever he was getting the connect from, to the French
that
connect.
At one point, Frank Matthews had been prepared to cooperate with the authorities, on condition that he left some of his men alone. An offer Miller allegedly refused, which made no sense.
That was stupid. We already had them on the wiretaps. On top of that, somebody spooked Matthews by telling him he was going to get life. You never say that. Matthews must have felt as if he had no choice but to run.
In any case, the investigators continued
No
their
shit,
work,
bro. That guy
which then
definitely knew
brings
he had
us
to
to
run.
January 28th, 1974. The day
Man got up
Glenn
out the
Chisholm and
cut.
Al
Yo,
Parrish
Honda guy,
went
what's
to
up,
Madison
man?
Square Garden in New York to watch the second fight between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. The aim was to catch Frank Matthews, a diehard Muhammad Ali fan. The two investigators had been informed that Frank had undergone cosmetic surgery to modify his features and thus go incognito. Glenn Chisholm recalls,
I was really excited. I was going to an Ali Frazier fight and catch a big fugitive too. The experience was really something for a young agent like me.
That day, at least 20,000 people attended the legendary fight. The agents arrived early to observe the crowd, tried to take photos, but nothing, not a single sign of Frank Matthews. It was another failure. A year goes by, and the investigation group, which includes Glenn Chisholm and Al Parrish, has not made one iota of progress. It turns out that the investigators had spent an enormous amount of time looking for clues, examining the slightest piece of evidence, traveling across the United States and abroad to follow up potential leads, and in the end, had achieved very little. In the end, they knew as much about Matthews' disappearance as they did at the start, a status quo that prompted the DEA to disband the investigation group.
We felt like we had wasted our time and had gotten nowhere. The DEA didn't have its act together.
The investigation was then handed over to the U.S. Marshals, who took up the case from scratch, given the paucity of information on the fugitive. But here too, as time went on, leads became increasingly scarce. The DEA, which had kept the Matthews file open and continued the search, then saw a new generation of agents arrive in the following decades, who certainly knew Frank, but had other things to worry about.
Yeah, I've seen that shit before,
This was
bro.
a time when major drug traffickers in Colombia and Mexico were monopolizing all the attention of the American authorities, and the Frank Matthews case was no longer the DEA's priority.
Pretty
So,
cool.
the U.S. Marshals took over the case and tried to locate him themselves, but it was always the same scenario. Mike Pizzi, a member of the U.S. Marshals who oversaw the investigation against Frank Matthews, recalls,
"We spent countless hours pursuing and harassing everyone we thought knew Matthews or who had contact with him. Some people were hassled to the point that they found it necessary to change their locations. Others got used to seeing us on a regular basis, and they didn't like it."
A frontal strategy, but one that had its limits, as Dave O'Flaherty, also a member of the U.S. Marshals, points out.
"We didn't shake up anything. We asked someone, 'Did you see Frank?' They'd try to play us. They'd say, 'Got some money, brother? I'll tell you.' We concluded that nobody we talked to knew anything, and that Frank Matthews was no longer in New York City."
The U.S. Marshals continued to search, then took a closer look at the 3 sons Frank had left behind. That's when they learned that one of them was in prison for stealing cars. This was surprising, as Frank was known to be a good father. But to go from a caring father to a heartless one was strange. A suspicion shared by Mike Pizzi, who states,
"If Matthews had $20 million when he left and he was still alive, what was his son doing stealing cars? I didn't feel that Frank had reached out to his family since he disappeared."
Had he deliberately cut himself off from those closest to him to ensure an effective escape?
Alright, chat, I'm gonna go to bed. I'm fucking tired. I'm tired, man. 10 o'clock, almost 11. Appreciate y'all for chilling. I'm fucking going to sleep. God bless. Have a good one, boys. Yo, hang on. Rip a toke real quick. We'll rip a toke real quick. We'll rip a toke, throw on a song, you know? New boss? What do you mean? Oh, I'm gonna smoke that Tokioki, bud. Bro. I need to get me a personal chef. Alright, toke's up. Cheers, and I'm going to bed. Peace out, gentlemen.